Hi everyone, I'm joined today by Alan Kelly, who's a pro referee in the US, officiates on the MLS and other competitions around the world. Alan, thanks for joining us during this period of time to answer a few questions from our users. How's everything going there?
It's good afternoon or evening or morning or night to whoever's tuning in. It's really strange times we're in. But look, I think like everybody else around the world, we're trying to make the best of the situation that we're in. There's lots of online stuff going on. This being one of them. It's just look, we take it one day at a time type of thing.
Cool. How's it like? What are you doing to kind of keep yourself prepared for when the season, I guess, resumes? You're only 1 week in, right, in the MLS, but like, yep. It's eventually going to resume at some point. Who knows when? But like, how is pro or yourself just keeping yourself engaged or motivated?
We're 2 weeks 2 weeks into the season before it ceased a couple of weeks ago. So all the preparation stuff that we had done, kind of still exists from a training point of view. We still have our training workouts. We still have daily interaction with our sports science team and our instructors. We've got, it's no different to most people around the world at the minute, and so there's a lot of stuff like that. I do a lot of online instruction. I have been doing a lot of online instruction over the last couple of days here as well. So that's kept us going. Pro are very proactive. We've got our VAR manager sending out regular updates and clips in terms of keeping us in tune that way. Our referee manager and assistant referee manager both send out weekly updates with different stuff. Yesterday, our referee manager sent out week one video test with 10, 12 clips there, giving us an opportunity to look at, I think it was simulation, those clips were. So it's engaging. It's keeping us going in terms of the activity and just keeping us tuned in. I'm currently injured and have been for the last 8 weeks. Feels like a lifetime. So I can't get out and run, but I can cycle and walk. And my basement at the minute is a temporary home gym. So that's what we're doing. That's, as I said, we make the best of what we have.
No, brilliant. I saw in a few posts on your Twitter and the Pros Twitter account of some home videos that you've made to keep yourself and your family motivated. So what were they? You had the Patrick's Day one?
Well, it's the things that you do to try and keep yourself occupied. The first one was St. Patrick's Day, and obviously there was no parades or anything like that due to everything that's going on. So we decided to make a really, really short video of our in-home St. Patrick's Day parade, which was my son, my 9-year-old son, who was all in for it. And my wife, who did some Irish dancing, my 3-year-old daughter, who just followed what her mom was doing in front of her, my 12-year-old daughter, who was really reluctant to get involved, but she participated. And then there was me doing. I can't really explain what I was trying to do. It was, like I had an injured calf, and I tried to do something with it, so it just looked as if I was on a horse and along that way. So it was a little bit of fun. It was a little bit of light humor, just to, in some times where we need to make people laugh. That was that. And the other was again, it was a little spin, a bit of a spin on the stay-at-home challenge, where I see people do keepy uppies with toilet rolls. So myself and 2 of my kids dressed up in referee kit and did the MLS walkout. Instead of picking the ball off the ball stand, we picked some toilet roll off the ball stand. So,
that's brilliant. That was me. That to me came across as, I can't do keepy uppies, so here's our version now.
Well, I can do keepy uppies, but as I said, without wanting to make excuses for myself, with an injured calf, I didn't think it was the best thing to do was to hop around on one leg type of thing. So we decided to do that along with the new MLS anthem. So I said we'd try and incorporate that in. So again, a little bit of fun
and brilliant. Brilliant. The pro guys tweeted it out as well, which was cool.
Yeah.
So we're going to go into like Q&A. We've asked some of our kind of users questions about what they'd want to ask you. Before I start, I'd love to understand those two photos on your wall. I thought it was Atlanta United on the bottom because it's red and black, but I don't think it is. Go on, tell us what those are.
Well, I'm surprised you can even see those. The first one is lower one is just a picture of myself and Michael Ballack when he played with Leverkusen in the Champions League game way back, and the one on the top. I'm not sure if you can make it up, but it's Lionel Messi and David Silva playing for Argentina and Spain back in 2009 in Madrid, and I'm in the background there with an action shot of me. So yeah, that's one for the memory bank for sure.
Amazing. No, great. So I'm gonna go into some of the questions. We've got a couple where people have just emailed us in, and we've got a few that are videos that people have sent in. So we'll try and play those and get your answers. So there was a few themes. Much was about just general advice. Some was about VAR, as you could imagine. Some is about dealing really with players in dissent and stuff. So we'll approach them as we go. The first one's from Ross, who's a grassroots referee in the US. He says this is my third year as a referee. He's just starting out to do amateur adult games to try and begin in his upgrade process. His question is in regards to personal attitude. How do you develop a mentality of always being calm and composed, but showing a stern action when players are combative?
Well, I think that's just one that comes with experience. That's not something that for me specifically, it's something that's developed over time. Trying to get the balance right between being over familiar and not communicative at all. So depending on the circumstance, that's how I would react, or how I would encourage someone to approach that. Depending on the circumstance in the game, the situation in the game. The game is full of emotion, and as players and coaches maybe show too much emotion, it's imperative that we keep our emotion in check. We're always going to have an emotional outburst during games. Giving people the opportunity to go from here and bring it down a little bit, I think is key. That would be my suggestion. Just give it some time. First of all, always remain composed. And depending on the circumstance, we'll determine whether it's a quiet word, stern look, or maybe just maybe more of a aggressive, assertive response.
And it's okay to mix and match your kind of communication with different players as the game goes on, right? Is that fair?
Yeah, certainly. I'm a big believer in communication during the game. And again, I'll quantify that by saying that it's important that we don't become too familiar with players at whatever level that we're operating at, whether it's grassroots, whether it's adult leagues, college games, etc. But communicating properly, effectively, but not to the point where we become too familiar and possibly get taken advantage of in situations like that. So communicate by all means.
Great. Similar kind of questions from Mick and Bradley. I'll start with Mick's question, who's a level 7 referee in the UK. He says, how do you deal with confrontational players and managers specifically? And just on that, Bradley, who's a level 5 in the UK, says, how would you deal with players or management who constantly appeal for decisions or continue to question decisions from the refereeing team? So it's kind of twofold there: confrontational players and players or management who are continuously questioning decisions. And when does something go over the line or not?
Sure, they're really good questions. I think when it comes to constant questioning of your decisions. Again, I don't want to be too prescriptive and say, hey, if somebody says this, you have to react like this. This is very much a personal thing again. There will be scenarios where people say things in games where it will really it'll really hit a chord with you, and you'll react accordingly. Anybody that's consistently questioning stuff, depends on how they're questioning it. If it's just a general question, if it's more combative or whatnot, if it's a constant in your face thing, I would nip that in the bud earlier rather than later. Have something in your vocabulary locker that just like a one-liner where you say to a player something like, "Hey, look, that's 2 or 3 times that you've questioned my decision. I'm now having a word to you. If this carries on, then you run the risk of yellow or red next time it happens." Something like that. Like always remaining composed when you have to deal with things like that. But if it goes to a point where it goes over the line and you feel that you have to act, then the laws of the game support you with that. But it's a very individualistic thing in terms of how people deal with it. But as I always say, you're not there to be somebody's sounding board. Okay, communicate by all means. If the other person is reciprocal with that, great. If the rapport is good, but if it's more assertive and aggressive from the player or coach, then act accordingly.
Great, cool. Some VAR questions. Has VAR made your job as an on-field referee easier or more difficult? And how would you like VAR to improve in the future if you see there needs to be improvement? That's from Paul Holmes, who's a level 5 in the UK.
All right. Hey, Paul, thanks for the question. First one first. Has it made it easier or more difficult? It hasn't made it more difficult. That's what I would say. Easier. It certainly assisted. That would be what I would say on that. The way I've approached VAR as a referee has always been. It hasn't been any. My approach to the game hasn't been any different. I've always tried to keep my pre-game approach and my focus on the game the same as it's always been. You go and you referee as you've always refereed. Okay, or I go and referee as I've always refereed. And if there's a decision there where I have missed key match incident related to penalty kicks, red card offences, goals, and mistaken identity, if there's a clear error there, then VAR will assist in correcting that. And ultimately, that's what we want as officials, is to have that decision correct. So in terms of my approach, it's always been the same. There's been situations over the past, like we are in Major League Soccer. We have been operating with VAR since August 2017, and there has been plenty of situations where I've gone to the monitor, or I've been sent to the monitor, had a look, and changed my decision for the betterment of the game. And ultimately, that's what VAR is for. In terms of improvements for VAR in the future, I think if you look at what VAR is now compared to what it was back in 2017 when it was launched, it's evolved a little bit to now. And I think in a year or two's time, it will evolve even further. I'm not going to make suggestions in terms of it. One thing that people are talking about always is the offside aspect, where leagues have the lines, or competitions have the lines, and you've got that really, really narrow offside scenario. So I think that's the one that has caused lots of discussion. That's probably one that will be looked at. I know there's been lots of suggestions in terms of what should be done, which there may be merit to. So maybe there will be a tweak in the protocols from that point of view. So yeah, that's where I see it going.
I'm intrigued by the by how you guys are doing it. So maybe you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, no. The simple answer to that is that if the VAR has an angle that shows that a player is clearly in an offside position or not, so unless there's clear evidence, the on-field decision will stand. So that's as clear as I can be with that in terms of how we operate it.
No, that's perfect. Great. So, should the way we apply laws be removed from the league's control so there's a consistent approach on how we kind of implement the laws and only one source? So that's a question from Ryan Atkin, who's a level 2 in England. Does that make sense? Like, it seems like different countries have slightly different interpretations of laws. And how should we get away from that or not?
Yeah, well, look, hi, Ryan. It sounds like there may be league, with the league you're operating in, there might be some league intervention in terms of law. The laws are the laws. It's that simple. So how we interpret them as referees, I think throughout the world you'll have different referees will interpret things a little bit differently. But in terms of what the law says, that's what we follow. There are guidelines. That's how we start our 60 minutes or our 70 minutes or our 90-minute games. Is governed by what's in the laws of the game. In terms of how leagues, I can't really say. I can't say what your league is, or I can't attest to what your league is suggesting in terms of law. But in terms of how we apply it as referees, we apply it as it says within the laws of the game, and we'll have differences of opinion, of course. We might see an incident, and you show it to 10 referees, 5 will say yellow, 5 will say red, kind of thing, and that will be down to our interpretation of things. But as long as we're consistent in terms of our application of the laws, then that's all we can do.
Hi Alan, Duncan Williams, Category 1 referee in Scotland. Question for you, other than the fitness side of things, what's the most difficult thing you find about being a top official?
Hi Duncan, thanks for the question there. It's a really interesting one. I'm going to use my own experience in terms of the travel aspect here. First of all, in the US, that's a difficult thing to master and blend in with an every week scenario. Sometimes twice a week. Sometimes traveling from home all the way across the other side of the country can take up to 6 hours. So there is that possibility. So you travel the day before, 6-hour flight, do your game, exert all the energy that you put into your game, and then invariably you have a relatively early flight coming back the following day. So that's 12 hours of flying over a short period of time, along with the exerting the energy. So it's a difficult one to try and explain, but that brings its own challenges. And in terms of top level refereeing, I think something that we all encounter is the amount of TV scrutiny, the amount of cameras in stadiums. High definition is the bane of every referee's life who operates at the top level like that. So the increased level of scrutiny is always challenging. But look, with that, you always try and up your game. You always try and get into the best possible positions to create the best possible angles and so on to get to the right decision for the game. So there you go. Hope that's a kind of a two-part answer that I hope answers your question.
Hi Alan, my name is Nathan Mattick and I'm Britain's first wheelchair user to qualify as a football referee in the UK. I have a quick question for you. What was your favourite stadium to officiate at and why?
Hi Nathan, congratulations on your success. In terms of my favourite stadium, I'm often asked that, and I don't have a favourite stadium, but I do have favourite stadiums. If I can cheat a little bit with the answer. In terms of back home in Ireland, my favourite stadiums to referee in were Dalymount Park, which is home to Bohemians FC, just simply because of the history attached to that particular stadium. And also Turner's Cross, which is in Cork, which is my home city, because as a young player growing up, so my first cup final as a referee was in Turner's Cross, and I'd refereed there many times in the League of Ireland. In terms of my European ventures, I was really lucky to referee in the Bernabeu in Madrid on a Champions League game. It's a fantastic stadium. The history attached to it, the atmosphere that it generates, is really, really good. And the Allianz Arena in Munich, again, lucky enough to referee in a fantastic stadium there. But so there are two that will stand out from a European point of view. And here in the US, there's some fantastic stadiums. Seattle is a favorite of mine. Really good atmosphere there. Portland, a fantastic atmosphere in Portland, and they've built on a little bit last year. To add more spectators there. Really good atmosphere there. Then you've got places like the stadium at Kansas City, is a real proper football stadium as well. Really good atmosphere. And I will say Atlanta's stadium, the Mercedes-Benz Stadium, for me holds a special place simply because the 2018 MLS Cup final, which I was privileged enough to referee, was held there in front of, I think, 74,000 fans. And more special to me was that my family were able to enjoy that as well. So again, I've cheated. I've given probably 6 or 8 stadiums there. So hopefully that answers your question, and continued success in your own career.
Hey, Alan, Nathan calling here from the United States. I'm currently a regional referee and looking to get into more professional games. My question for you is, what's the difference in managing players coming from just the amateur division versus professional game? And what's the difference like? What are some things that are said? What are some things that you do? Facial expressions, stuff like that. What are things that you personally do or you prefer to do in challenging situations when confronted from a player when he's challenging your decisions? Thanks.
Okay. Again, Nathan, thank you for your question. Where do I start with it? Okay. So in the professional game, there's I see a higher intensity in terms of the players and the coaches. People always ask me, is it more difficult to referee professional players or amateur players? With the expectation that I will always say professional players. But where the professional game offers more challenges to us as referees, I think the more challenging from a player point of view comes at grassroots and amateur levels, because there's a serious consequence to players at a professional level if their behavior is bad towards officials. And they understand that, and it's their livelihood. So there's a respect there. There's a respect for what we do. We don't always agree, but there's a respect for what we do. It's been more challenging at times refereeing amateur games for me, because there's a constant leveling of questioning of your games, of your decisions. Unfortunately, the area of physical abuse at referees, not going to really get into that, but that exists at all levels, but primarily at amateur levels. So that brings about its own challenges. Moving on, in terms of how we deal with players, whether it's players at a professional level or whether it's players at an amateur level, my suggestion is always to be respectful, even though the situation might be challenging. Always be respectful to the answer that you give, the way you conduct yourself, and how you speak to a player. So I would always say to be respectful. Always keep your emotion in check. I think I've said that to a previous question earlier on, but always maintain that emotion. Again, even when the circumstances is challenging. And everything else in terms of your question, in terms of dealing with players' facial expressions, that's a very, very individualistic thing. Communicate by all means. Always maintain a level standard. Don't talk down to players. Always speak to players how you would like to be spoken to yourself, even though that's not always the case. But if a situation requires a stern look, then it requires a stern look. Practice that. If it's a case of having a quiet word, have something prepared to say, just your what I call your go-to line, just to get a player back on side type of thing. And if it's something that needs to be more assertive, again, have what you're going to say prepared. Have your prepared go-to line for those situations. Hopefully that answers your question. I'm conscious that I'm rambling on a little bit there, but hopefully the answer makes sense to you.
You mentioned a couple of times vocabulary and like having like lines. Do you have a couple of favorites? Like what are the top lines that you pull out during a game?
Yeah, I don't have favorites as such, but look, like just some simple go-to things is you've when I'm addressing a player, you've spoken, you've aired your grievance, right? I've listened, right? So now listen to me, right? Please don't interrupt me. I'll give you I'll give you an answer. Hopefully we'll agree. If we don't, hey, let's learn to disagree and just live with each other and move on, type of thing. I always think kind of getting a player back to your level is really, really important. Understanding the player's frustration. That's something I always say. Hey, look, I understand your frustration here. I understand that you're 1-0 down with 15 minutes to go. Okay, but don't take your frustration out on me. All right, this is the way I see it, and let's move on, type of thing. So. But yeah, a lot of stuff will come to you in the moment as well.
Brilliant, cool. So I'll get back some of the email questions. So this is from Samuel, who's a grassroots referee in the US. You probably get asked this a lot around your fitness piece. So what does your fitness regiment look like, and how do you keep in top condition out of season and maintain a top level of fitness for the game during it? Obviously, the regiment would look quite a bit different for an MLS referee than a grassroots referee. Nevertheless, he'd love to hear your thoughts, how you stay in shape, and perhaps what you would suggest for kind of grassroots referees, how they stay in shape, and maybe how did you stay in shape as you were going through the levels?
Sure. Yeah. Hey, Samuel. Thanks for the question. Hope you're keeping well. That question is really appropriate right now because I'm injured and have been for the last 8 weeks. Which brings its own challenges in itself. Frustration being the main one, and dealing with that. But to go back to the positive side of it, we have a fantastic sports science team with Pro who manage us really, really well and manage us in terms of the challenges that we face, at different times of the year. Manage us in terms of the travel aspect that we have to undertake, the games, the preparation for games, and breaking it down into pre-season, starting in pre-season. And I always question what pre-season is, because I always ask, do we have an off season? So some of us do, some of us don't. For me, this last couple of months, I didn't really have an off season, in that my MLS season finished on the 1st of November. But I went to Qatar for the FIFA World Cup in early December. And obviously you want to go there in peak physical condition. So maintaining that throughout that period. And then once I came back from that, we have a Christmas break and you're back into on the last weekend of February. So it's a very, very short time frame. So to be fair to our sports science team, I think they do a fantastic job. They work us really hard in terms of high intensity sessions in pre-season. You've got fitness testing and so on to go through, and they maintain that into the MLS season. We have not at the minute, but we have our pro camps, our pro training camps, which are every 3 weeks, where we all get together in a location throughout the US, where we're together for 5 days and 4 days for the first 3 months of the season, every other week. And within that period, we have specific fitness. There's a fitness component to every day of those camps. Some high intensity sessions, some medium intensity sessions, recovery sessions, and all that goes with that in preparation for or games. Day before games, we do what we call match prep, which is short session, but very, very specific to what we would do during games. And then post game, you've got a recovery routine, and the day after games, you've got your recovery routines, and that cycle goes on throughout the season. And they have, as I said, there's a lot in that. Probably too much to answer in this question, but there's a variation from high intensity, medium intensity, low intensity recovery sessions, some speed work, some strength work, some agility, some agility and endurance stuff, and it's a good variation. Every morning we have to report in terms of our morning wellness, heart rates, resting heart rates, and all of that. So as I said, there's a science to it that these guys do a phenomenal job with to try and keep us fit and healthy during the course of the season. Even though I'm not healthy at the minute in terms of the ability to run, that's nothing down to. That's just an element of bad luck on a very, very simple routine that we do like 3-4 times a week. And I'll add a little bit of old age into that as well.
You said it, not me.
There you go. Yeah, anyway, I hope that gives you some little bit of an insight into what we do as professional referees.
And then how, like, going through the levels, like how you obviously didn't have a sports science team behind you as you were grassroots referee. So can you think, it's been a while since you were at that level, but can you think back onto like how you came up with your own training program? Did you train? Or what did you do?
Yeah, we did. So growing up, so my dad was a FIFA referee and a League of Ireland referee. So I've been around referees for as far back as I can remember. And one thing that I always remember is in Cork, where I lived, they had a league. They had probably 6 or 8 officials that operated at the at League of Ireland level and international level at any given time, and they trained in a facility called the Marlake Arena, or the Marlake, which was an old League of Ireland ground, but also only one of only two athletic tracks in Cork in the city. So I used to go with my dad, and I used to go to watch their training sessions when I was, I don't know, 9, 10, 11 years of age. I played soccer, so there was a training element to that. But when I stopped playing and started refereeing at 18 or 19 years of age, that group, that League of Ireland group in Cork, had maintained through the generations to training in the Marlake. So I had been training there along with my dad, and then just continued to train there on a Wednesday evening with other referees at that time. So when I became a referee at grassroots level, that was one of my training events or training evenings. And on the track, we did a lot of sprint stuff. We did a lot of endurance stuff: 400 meter running, 800 meter running, 1600 meter running, and so on. We didn't really have any. It was at a time where the words sports science weren't really involved in at that level at all. So it was very much a trial and error basis. You'd go up on a track and you'd run, but that obviously stood to us. And as football evolved and as the refereeing aspect to it evolved, then we ended up having a fitness coach who would organize more specific training, and that was led by, at the time, by UEFA, who would forward training plans and so on. As I became a FIFA referee and having engaged with other FIFA referees and the area of sports science really kicking on, that's where it kind of kicked on. But at a young age, it was just hey, look, if there was a field there, you just went and ran in it. If there was a track there, you went and ran in it, and you did what all the other adults at the time were doing. If people aren't lucky enough in a group environment like that, my advice is always just, hey, look, keep your physical fitness up where you can. There are online capabilities to go to, and I'm quite sure quite sure there are referee training plans there in this day and age. If you go online, you'll find some stuff like that. But for us back then, it was just, hey, there's a space, we can run in it, and let's go.
Brilliant, cool. I'm gonna go back to some of these questions. So what have we got here? We've got a couple from Ireland. Let's go. You just been mentioning Ireland. Daniel Long, grade 3 referee in Ireland. He's got a couple of questions. Do you miss the rivalry of the how do you even say this? Airtricity League, and how does it compare to refereeing in the US? So that's one of them.
Hey Daniel, I know a couple of Daniel Longs, so hopefully you're one of those. So yes is the answer. I always miss the League of Ireland. I always miss refereeing in the League of Ireland, but I follow. Even though I'm living in the US, 6-7 years. Anytime I go home, I go and see a League of Ireland game, or 2 or 3. My wife really freaks out when we go back, because I go missing for evenings. So I like to get to League of Ireland games, irrespective of where they are, whether it's Cork, Cork and Cove have teams in the Premier and First Division, so it's easy to get to those if there's games on. One of the trips back last year, I think I took my son to Dublin. Shamrock Rovers were playing Bohemians. Big rivalry, probably the biggest rivalry in the League of Ireland. So I took him to one of those games, just to give him that experience of seeing that. I do miss refereeing in the League of Ireland. I do miss those Bows and Rovers games, along with the other games there. I keep up to date with it on a weekly basis, and still follow it. So miss refereeing in it, but always been a lifelong League of Ireland fan, with my dad's involvement in refereeing growing up and going to games and so on. In terms of how does it compare, it's a difficult one to do, right? There are different environments, different leagues. I'm stating the obvious. The stadiums in MLS are first class, where some of the stadiums at home, some really good and modern stadiums, and some that need a little bit of work. I don't think I'm offending anyone by saying that, and I don't mean any offense by that. But that's one side of it. TV exposure in MLS is much more than it is in the League of Ireland. But from a playing point of view, there's some, like I've always said this, there's some fantastic players in the League of Ireland, for as far back as I can remember. But in terms of refereeing players, there have been some really quality players in the League of Ireland who wouldn't have been out of place in England, higher leagues in England and in MLS if they were given or had the opportunity. So where the League of Ireland game is very much, it's fast paced and very direct. The athleticism in MLS. The game is much more technical and tactical than maybe at home. And again, that's not to be disparaging in any way towards the league at home, because in my opinion, the league at home is a really, really good product. But yeah, I do miss it, and I always take the opportunity to go and see a game at home. I get to watch the games here live on TV whenever I'm not traveling to MLS games. So very much keeping up to date.
His next question was, what was the best advice you received when starting out, and what's the best advice you've given a new or up-and-coming referee?
That's a really good question. So I was giving, like every referee, we're all given advice, and we'll take every piece of advice that we can, and we'll try and utilize it to what helps us develop. And some advice will be good, some advice maybe not so good to the individual. I always remember one of the things that was said to me early, just after I had done my referee's beginner's course. I remember my dad saying it to me, but not just my dad. One of the other instructors at home way back when said, just focus on your own games and not worry too much about what games other referees are getting. And the world of refereeing is a competitive environment. We compete with each other for games. And if you look at that from a local point of view, you might have 3 or 4 referees, might be more, at any particular level in an area that are competing, and if you as a referee start looking at other referees' games, you lose focus on your own games. So from a developmental point of view, always focus on just your own game. My dad said something to me years ago. He said, never worry about a game that's not yours until it comes in your front door, until you're assigned to it or appointed to it. And that, I think, has stood with me pretty much. To me, that was said to me years ago, and I've pretty much lived by that all the way through. So, for me, I never looked too far ahead in terms of what was out there. Always just, I hate using the cliche, you take one game at a time, but when you're young and when you're up and coming and when you're developing, it's very much a case of just taking one game at a time. That would be the advice. That's the best advice that was given to me. And if it's the best advice that was given to me, it would be wrong of me to not impart that to anybody else coming through, Just stay focused on your own game, stay focused on your own development, stay focused on, if you learn one thing out of every game, all right, then irrespective of how the game has gone, it's a successful game.
That's brilliant. Do you ever make notes after your games? Like you just said, if I can learn one thing from a game, do you ever keep like a diary, like a journal or anything?
No, I'm not. I'd love to say that I'm that organized an individual, but I'm not. I've never really been like that. It's just you take a mental note of something. Obviously, if you have an assessor or a coach that watches your game, they'll give you words of encouragement and advice. And again, you take whatever you can and then you implement it into your own game. So yeah, I know it sounds a little bit corny in terms of if you learn one thing from every game type of thing, and that could be anything, anything from how to deal with a player to positioning to something in law, anything at all. So if you learn one thing from your game, to me, you've had a successful game as long as you can put it into practice. Like mistakes, we all make them, as long as you don't keep making the same ones. That's the key to it.
Exactly. Cool. So a couple of questions from Kelvin in New Zealand. I'll ask them both together. So the first one is, what's your view on how to apply the spirit of the game into refereeing? It's going to take a while to answer that one. Another one is, I'm seeing referees around the world utilize a more liberal flow of a game. For example, I notice a midfielder attacking free kick, defending team player stands over the ball to stop a quick play. Why do referees not yellow card this when this is a yellow card offence? What are your thoughts? So, 2 questions there.
The spirit of the game. That's we could talk all day about the spirit of the game. I suppose understanding the game, understanding the rights and wrongs in the game, and how we apply that. That would be the way I would look at it. I would always look at things from a fair play point of view, okay, and trying to adopt a fair play perspective. Somebody once said, actually, I think David Ellery said way back at an event that we were at that, what does football expect? And that can be applied to lots of elements of refereeing. What does football expect? And I think keeping that to the forefront of your thoughts will add to the spirit of the game. In terms of the second question, or the second part of the question, in terms of was it?
I think it's more a question around like standing over the ball and why and it kind of comes back to the spirit of the game question is why is that not penalised more in terms of just giving a brandishing a yellow card?
Well, it can and it should be. I'm not saying it should be for every single scenario because just because somebody stands over the ball, they may not necessarily be standing over the ball. They may just be in a position. Player might put the ball in front of him and want to take that free kick and get that player who's standing there caution. So we got to be really careful on that one. That comes down to your skill level as a referee, right? Being proactive towards things. Okay, so you see it. try and see it before it happens. Get there before that potential happens. Be assertive to ensure that, if that's the tactic of the player or the team, right, that you see it early and you deal with it early. If that's a quiet word or it's a stern look or so on early, then so be it, dealing with it. But if it's a repetitive thing, then that has to be action accordingly. And law supports you with that. Okay, so it's up to you it's up to you as a referee, each of us as referees, to understand what our limit and what our line is in terms of the actions that we take. But doing nothing is not the thing to do.
That sounds like a saying that can go on a t-shirt. Doing nothing is sometimes not the thing to do.
Yeah, maybe.
Cool. Okay, so this is thinking back. At which point in the early parts of your career did you feel that you would be able to get somewhere? This is Morgan Davis, level 6 from the UK. So,
okay, hey Morgan, thanks for your question. No, you're going to make me think. I'm going to say the way back 98, 97, 98, the Football Association of Ireland came up with the concept of the Referee School of Excellence, which was an educational program for young aspiring referees. And it put, way back then, I'm going to say a group of maybe 30, 35 of us from around the country in one environment. And it was pretty much spelled out to us at the beginning of that the League of Ireland panel back then was aging. Football was changing, referee was changing, and the association were taking steps to take younger officials and educate them more specific, so that they could rise through the ranks at an earlier stage at the time. It was not a case of saying, well, you're on the School of Excellence program, therefore this will push you further. And we were tested. We had some really good coaches way back there at the time, one of which will always stand out to me, a gentleman by the name of Eamon Farrell, who was a former League of Ireland and FIFA referee, a fantastic person, who really, really pushed us. He was a tough taskmaster. And we never got anything easy from Eamon. Even praise and performance wasn't given easily. But Eamon coached us and he educated us really, really well. And he came and he watched games all over the country. He, along with some of the other instructors, but Eamon's always the guy who stood out to me. And so I think maybe that was a 2-year program, and I think maybe a year into that program, I felt a more confident referee. I felt a more educated referee. I felt that my application to what I was doing in terms of law and my games was better than it had been at the beginning of that. And I think a year in, I saw the potential in terms of where things could go and what I could possibly achieve. Should I stick with it, and should I apply myself properly? And at the conclusion of that School of Excellence program, some of us graduated on to the School of Excellence, not School of Excellence, the League of Ireland panel, and things just kind of progressed from there. So where I may have had aspirations before that, I think probably 6 months, a year into that, I saw the potential, saw the way refereeing around the world was changing at that particular time as well, in that, you were seeing more younger referees and the opportunities for younger referees. So, applying yourself properly and doing all that kind of stuff was key. So I saw the potential. And as I said, from a learning point of view, felt I learned more, felt I was in a better place. And once I remained open to learning, and I think that's a key thing, even at this stage of my career, being open to learning, and helped me to progress. So I think, to answer your question, way back during that School of Excellence period was when I saw the potential to progress.
Perfect. This one's a really good one. You kind of alluded to it earlier as one of the challenges. It's from Deryll, who's a level 4 in England. How do you bounce back from when you've made a mistake, which may be highlighted to the wider public? Obviously, you talked about HD earlier, so
yeah, that's a really good question, having that bounce back ability, is that a phrase from? I'm showing my age now.
No, that's West Brom, isn't it? Bounce back.
It was a soccer AM term from probably 10, 11 years ago. But look, we all experienced difficult days as referees, and that can cover a lot of different areas of refereeing. We've all had bad games. We've all had one individual mistake. You might have 89 minutes of really positive refereeing, and then make one mistake in the last minute. That's the only thing that game will be remembered for. I think keeping things clear in your head, right, and knowing and understanding that what we do, one of the pitfalls of what we do is that we are going to make mistakes. Okay, having the knowledge is one thing. Putting the knowledge into practice is something else. With all the practice, i.e. games, comes the opportunity to make mistakes and the inevitability of making mistakes. Seeing those mistakes, analysing those mistakes, learning from those mistakes, and saying, how can I do things better to make sure that this doesn't happen again, type of thing. And these could be really small things, or key match incidents that's really determine the outcome of it. Looking at it, analysing it, being self-reflective with it, but ultimately not getting too down over it. Okay, and I don't say that easily, because look, if I have a game on a Saturday and there's an incident in that game that I've made a mistake in, one way or the other, it'll play on my mind for a day or two. I'll come and I'll look at the game eventually, not straight away. I'll try and block it out for the immediate aftermath and give myself some time to reflect on it. I'll sit back, incident. I'll look at the game, and ultimately just break down how we got to that. It might be something as simple as being in the wrong being at the wrong angle, or interpreting something that you thought you have seen, and it turns out that it's not actually what you've seen. But just being able to accept that, learn from it, try and implement it to do it better in your next game. I always say, from when I was younger, I loved refereeing on a Saturday and a Sunday. Even though, like, you probably do 2 or 3 games on a Saturday back to back, and if you made those mistakes on a Saturday, you kind of go, "Oh, I think I messed up here, or I think I messed up there." But then you have the ability to go back down on a Sunday and try and rectify it to a degree, it happens. In game, if you think something happens, if you think something has happened in game, it's important, really, really important, to put it to the back of your mind, to block it out completely, and just stay focused on what's ahead. There's nothing you can do about the past, right? Other than let it affect you for something that's going to happen in the future, and that could be 1 minute later, it could be 25 minutes later. The sooner you block it out in game, the better. You'll have a more productive game in the end.
Brilliant. I was at a talk. Michael Oliver said the most important decision is the next one. So that's his kind of ethos of putting everything behind you.
Yeah, it certainly is. You could break what I've said there in the last couple of minutes, just down to that. The most important decision is the next one, and that's key and critical in terms of in terms of our in-game mindset.
Excellent. So we have I said there was a few VAR questions, so we'll go to these extra 2 now. One's from actually a FIFA assistant referee in Gibraltar called Andrew Mario Parody. His question is really about the whole experience. He says, can you take us through the whole experience with VAR before the match, during the match, and after the match, in terms of like your interactions with the other officials, and then it says discussions VAR officials have and what kind of discussions do you have with the refereeing observers as a VAR around the key match decision. So do you go as a VAR? I guess how are you assessed is another question there. And then there's Deryll Ann from the UK has also asked, what's the most frustrating thing about VAR, if there is anything that's frustrating? So
Okay.
VAR galore.
Yeah, so it's I'll give you my experience of my personal experience of VAR here in the US and internationally. So our experience here in the US is that the VARs and the AVAR are in stadium. They're part of the referee crew. So we walk the fields. We arrive at the stadium together. We walk the fields together. We do a pregame together. So the pregame instruction from the referee to the VAR is very clear in terms of the expectations, in terms of the communication aspect, and the pregame from the VAR to the referee also is clear. So it's important that that everybody's on the same wavelength. Okay. In terms of the communication aspect to it, we then go to our VAR area probably 50 minutes before the game. We go through the process with the video operators. We go through our cameras, our angles. We go through all of that side of things. We do our pre-game communication. We test out the communication, in-stadium communication between the VAR and the referee and the assistant referees and the AVARs to make sure that everything is in check. Not in check as in VAR check, but in place and in proper working order. And that's it. That's the cycle. That's the we'll communicate to the referee only when it's required to do so in game. And that's it. And hopefully we don't have to involve ourselves as VARs in the game. The referee does what the referee does. There's no requirement to involve ourselves in terms of video recommending reviews or anything like that. And if there is, then we've already covered that in the pre-game and the process and so on. And post-game, it's just a general going over. That's pretty much it. The process with pro is no different that way, and we go through what we need to go through post game, and that's generally it. And that's been my experience on the international tournaments that I've done as well. Is that they've been in stadium. You're part of the referee crew, and that's it. I haven't experienced working from a central location as a VAR. Even though lots of others have, I haven't gone through that experience. The only thing that we miss in relation to what I've said in stadium is the in-stadium capacity. There will still be pre-game discussions between referee and VAR in terms of their pre-games and so on in that scenario. So yeah, that's it. As VARs, you let the referee do their job. And only assist him or her when it's absolutely required to do so. So, in terms of what's my most frustrating thing about it, I don't know. I don't get in any way frustrated with the process. The process is the process. The protocol is the protocol. If I have a frustration. Maybe it's the expectation level of fans, players, media. Back when VAR went live a couple of years ago here in the US, our now boss Howard Webb did a fantastic presentation, I thought, in terms of educating the wider public. He conducted media days. I put an hour-long video presentation together in terms of what VAR is, and more importantly, what VAR isn't. And if the expectation, I think the expectation level from fans is that every decision on the field is open to correction, and it's not. I think here in the US, because of the other professional sports and video replay involvement in those sports, the cultural acceptance of VAR in soccer I mean, football was a slightly easier transition than maybe in Europe, where the soccer loving public probably weren't open or weren't exposed to that prior. So maybe it's that frustration, and frustration is probably the wrong word, but hey, look, maybe my expectation of look, I'm a football fan, I'm a soccer fan, I know there's emotion attached to every decision that we make as referees in VAR. So maybe that's. I wouldn't necessarily call it a frustration, but from time to time, when I listen to commentators, I get a little bit frustrated because sometimes what they say isn't correct, and the viewing public will take what they say as gospel as such.
You mentioned around the communication. So if there's a foul in the box that could be a potential. There's a challenge in the box that could be a potential foul. The referee doesn't give it. At what point do you communicate kind of VAR check? Is it straight away, or do you wait until the ball's gone out before you say, "Hey, I'm going to check this now. Slow it down"?
Well, as a referee, something happens in the penalty area, and you see it, and you don't deem it a penalty. You don't even have to. You don't even have to say anything because you know that the VAR is going to check that scenario already.
Okay.
But as a referee, what you can say is, "Hey, look, this is what I've seen. This is what I've seen." And for me, it's not enough for a penalty. I've seen the guy going over. I've seen a little bit of contact there, but it's not enough for a penalty kick. And that can sometimes assist the VAR in getting to where they need to get to. However, you might say that, and the VAR might say, well, it hasn't exactly happened like that, and it is a clear penalty here because it's reached that high bar threshold. We've often been in situations where we think we've seen something, but in actual fact, it's something a little bit different. To go back to your point, in terms of when do you know that the check has commenced? You already know that the check has commenced. Mm-hmm. And once the VAR has looked at it, the VAR will say, check complete, So every single decision on the field of play every single incident is checked. It's not necessarily going to go into review, So everything is checked. That's the key thing, As a VAR, you've got multiple camera angles. Somebody goes down in the penalty area. There's the potential for a red card in a challenge in the middle of the field, whatever it is. VAR will always go and look at it and give that check complete if it is. So and more often than not, that can be quite quick. They could see it 2 or 3 different angles. Take one look. That gut feeling even though you're a VAR, you're a referee. You're still a referee. That gut feeling you have on the field is the same as that gut feeling that you have off the field. And it's important that you don't. It's important that you take all the elements into the equation, not just one. A still shot could give you 1,000 different pictures, type of thing. But running plays through from start to finish, that's sometimes as important, probably more important.
Hi, my name is John. I'm a level 4 referee from England. My question to you would be, how do you deal with or keep track of persistent infringers during the 90 minutes?
So, John, thank you for your question in relation to persistent infringement or persistent infringers. What I would say is that as a crew, if you're working with a crew of 4, 2 assistants, 4th official, and a referee, part of my pre-game instruction is to keep an eye out on persistent infringement. So as a referee, you've got that sense on the field of play in terms of who's maybe fouled here and there, and a player comes onto your radar as such that way. What I always say to my assistants is, hey, just as a gentle reminder, if you see a guy who's a player who's committed 2 or 3 fouls, just a general verbal prompt. Hey, that's a second one. Hey, that's his third one. Just so that that you make a word with a guy just to say, hey, look, that's your second one in a short space of time. Just be careful. I empower my assistant referees to do that. But as a crew, it's as a team of officials, it's important to be able to identify that as early as you possibly can. You don't want to let a player ruin your game that way. It's obviously a bit more difficult if you're operating in a game on your own without assistant referees. Again, you may have. We don't prejudge players or anything like that, but you may have had these teams in the past. If you have, then great. You kind of know what to expect, and you kind of know what the players to look out for in terms of the potential for persistent infringement. So preparing yourself for that is one. If there are teams that you haven't had, again, it's just being it's crucial to your game that that you can identify when this is happening, either as a tactic or just when it comes to that player who's just clumsy and just keeps getting himself into situations where fouls are committed. It's important to have that conversation early with that player, be it on a one-to-one quiet word or on a more one-to-one basis, more public basis, so everybody's aware of it. But again, putting the player on notice. But again, I think I used this earlier in an answer. Doing nothing is not the right thing to do. So.
Do you keep like a? It's easy to keep a mental note and say you keep a mental note, but do you ever write it down? Like just put like a dot next to the number of the player for every time he's done something, or is that what you're expecting your fourth or your assistant to do?
Personally, I don't. Because look, I just like to keep the focus on things. I don't carry a notebook. Lots of referees do. I've never been one. I think I did. I did early in my career at one point. I just felt that it wasn't for me. So I'll keep yellows and reds. I'll keep Post-its on it. I know from a REFSIX point of view, you can put it on the watch if needs be. Just purely from a personal point of view, I didn't do that. It was more of the mental note. It was more of the identifying it early and empowering my assistant referees, my fourth official, just as a vocal reminder. Hey, look, that's that player's second or third incident in a period of time. A short period of time. I think that time aspect is crucial. If you've got a player that's committed 2, 3, 4 fouls in a really short space of time, as opposed to the same player that's committed 2, 3, 4 fouls over the course of from first to last is a 70-minute scenario. It's a little bit different than the shorter space. So hopefully that answers the question.
Hey, I'm Milan Michnanowski. I'm 24 years old. I'm a referee of the 3rd and 4th division in the Czech Republic. And firstly, I'd like to thank both of you, Alan and Hassan, for this opportunity. Have you ever decided to learn any other language than English because of your refereeing career, like German or French, or is English enough for you?
In relation to the question about learning another language, again, thank you for the question. A really good question. So for me, where I'm not fluent in other languages, I speak English. Some will say I'm not fluent in that, but English is my chosen language. I do have French and German that I learned way back when in school that have come in handy as a refereeing tool for during my career. I've updated my knowledge on both of those at one point or another, so I understand a lot. In terms of German and French, I speak a little bit, enough to get me by in terms of what I need on the field of play. Since I've moved to the US, my children are in school learn Spanish, so I've taken it upon myself to start learning Spanish. Not to the point where I'm fluent, but certainly to the point where I can get the point across. So having having words in different languages, I've always found helpful. If anybody has the ability to educate themselves, whether multilingual, then great. For anybody who looks for something from me, if I don't have an answer, I'll generally respond to them in Gaelic, because I know that there is nobody, and I mean nobody, will question an answer that I give them in Gaelic. I had an opportunity to do that way back when a player was he was being quite vociferous in Spanish, so I responded in Gaelic, which immediately stopped him in his tracks. So to the point where we ended up speaking in English, just to get our points across mutually, in order for the game to be, for us, mutually beneficial.
That's excellent. Do you think it comes? Is it on the pitch? Does it just help with man management? Does it help with respect? Do you feel like you get more respect from players when you're speaking the language that they speak, or is it just to help you understand when they're communicating to you?
Yes, I think so. I think so. And if you can, I know from my point of view, if I start using words in Spanish, like immediately you get that response from like, oh wow, the referee speaks my language, kind of thing, or French or German. Whenever I've used that over the course of my career, I think when the player knows that you're speaking English, or when you're conversing in English regularly, and then you revert to another language, it kind of triggers something in a player straight away. So I think it gets their attention maybe a little bit more. So yeah, look, I've used it. I found it helpful. One particular time, I remember a player, when I spoke some words of Spanish, decided he wanted to speak fluently in Spanish, to the point where I had to say to him in Spanish, hey, look, a couple of words, phrases, and sentences is as good as it gets for now. But if you come back to me maybe in a year or so, maybe we can have this conversation in Spanish. So, plus it's good. It's a good way to show the human side of what we do to a degree as well, where we can use it to kill a situation off, or just calm a situation down, or just use it to get by.
Excellent. So, Alan, thanks so much for your time. I know you've got a meeting to head to. We've got one last question from Luke in Australia, and it's a reflective question for your career, really. So, it's two parts. What's your toughest challenge that you've had in your career, and what was the proudest moment?
Right. G'day, Luke. Really bad. Okay, the toughest challenge. A couple of things. Maybe being from a perceived smaller footballing country like Ireland, the challenge in breaking through the categories in Europe was a really, really difficult thing to do. But one that I'm really proud of, in terms of where I got to referee, the level I got to referee while being a FIFA referee in Europe. I think that was a really tough thing to do, and I think moving to the US posed lots of different challenges from a personal point of view, from a professional point of view. Moving to a different footballing culture, different footballing environment. Even though I was more than familiar with MLS from watching it over a number of years, placing myself right smack bang in the middle of it proved really, really difficult. Having to prove myself all over again to my peers, to the players that I refereed, to my bosses, to coaches. Proving that I had the ability to operate at that level. I think that in itself was a challenge. To the point where I've been really, really privileged to referee some really important games here, and privileged and honored that people trusted me enough to to assign me to those games, and hopefully during those games we didn't let anybody down, and that's I think that's something to look back on. I know whenever I do finish refereeing, I'll look back on my time in the US really proudly in terms of hitting the challenges head on, and hopefully coming out the other side of it stronger. I think in the times that we're living in, the uncertainty that we're living in at the moment, I think using that line, dealing with the adversity and coming out the other end stronger is appropriate, and probably appropriate to finish up what we're doing today on.
No, that's excellent. So, Alan, once again, thank you so much for giving us some time. It's a lot longer than I was expecting, and we've gone through quite a lot of questions, which I know lots of our viewers will learn from, and I'm sure the people who ask the question are truly appreciative. So thank you so much, and hopefully we're not all kept in too much longer, but hopefully everyone who's watching this is staying at home, staying safe for now, and hopefully we can chat again in the future.
Yeah, from my point of view, just to say just a couple of things. Just to say, first of all, thank you to everybody for taking the time to forward the questions. Hopefully, you've got something out of the answers once you get past my rambling. But yeah, thank you very much for the time that you've taken for it. And as I said, hopefully you got something out of it. Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you guys. And stay safe, stay healthy, stay sanitized. All the words that we're living by at the minute. But yeah, stay safe and healthy out there to everyone.